Welcome to the Cybersecurity Defenders Podcast Weekly Intel Chat. My name's Christopher Luft. I'm one of the co-founders of LimaCharlie, and I will be your host. Joining me today to break down the cybersecurity news being shared by the awesome InfoSec community is the one and only Matt Bromley. And don't forget, this podcast is brought to you by LimaCharlie, maker of the SecOps Cloud platform, infrastructure for security operations. Think of it as a backend for your MSSP, where everything is built API first. Scale with ease and confidence as your business grows. You can start today for free at limacharlie.io. Now let's get into it. We're going to talk about some cybersecurity news. How are you doing today, Matt?
Chris, I'm doing well. I'm coming to you today from Washington, D.C. So normally I'm, traveling every now and then for some of these episodes, and I figured I'd let some folks know where I'm at because by the time this airs, I don't think I will be in Washington, D.C. anymore. But I am in the United States nation's capital, and it is hot and humid, and I won't talk about the weather. I'll just say I'm here. It's summertime and having fun, but I'm excited to be on this with you today.
And there's about a 5-day lag from when we record to when these get published. So, Matt, as long as you keep moving, you'll be safe.
That's right. I don't mind releasing my information. The moment they hear it, I'm not there anymore.
The first one I wanted to start with is, we always joke about like when we see information about a breach come up that we'll be talking about it later. And this one didn't take but a week. So more than just a week.
Wait a week.
So more than 90 state and local government organizations have been targeted in a recent wave of cyber attacks exploiting a vulnerability in Microsoft SharePoint, according to the Center for Internet Security, or CIS, while the group which facilitates cybersecurity collaboration among state, local, tribal, and territorial, SLTT, governments did not disclose which organizations were affected. It confirmed that no successful breaches or confirmed incidents have occurred so far. The attack campaign is linked to a broader wave of exploitation against unpatched SharePoint servers, and the underlying vulnerability has drawn widespread attention from cybersecurity firms and federal agencies. The broader scope of the campaign includes at least 400 confirmed victims worldwide, according to the Netherlands-based iSecurity. Among those targeted are reportedly several federal government agencies, and new victims continue to be discovered. The campaign has become a priority for incident response teams as attackers are leveraging the SharePoint vulnerability to attempt unauthorized access across a range of public and private sector networks. Although the exact exploit used wasn't specified in this report, previous disclosures have pointed to known privilege escalation flaws in SharePoint that remain unpatched in some environments despite earlier advisories. Well, there you go, Matt.
There we go, Chris. I think the coolest thing about this article, of course, I am not relishing the downfall of some organizations, but last week when we talked about SharePoint, we said, hey, we'll talk about this in the future. And one of the interesting parts about doing this show together is we get to talk about a thing, and then a few months later, we get to say, hey, there was that thing that we talked about. This took a week. This one took a week to turn around. So this ties in directly with, I believe, the SharePoint vulnerabilities that were disclosed in the past 2 weeks or so. You and I talked about them on the previous Intel Chat episode, where there were these couple of pretty significant SharePoint vulnerabilities out there. POC code was out there already being weaponized, and I believe Microsoft was already at the table like, hey, this is out in the wild, and here we go. Right. I know you're going to talk about one of the bigger or maybe more significant victims of this in just a moment, but it's not surprising me that adversaries weaponized and started to spread this around so quickly, number one. Number two, I think this continues to, or at least it should continue to remain a priority for organizations out there with those on-prem internet-facing SharePoint deployments that are out there. You can't rest on your laurels, and you can't ask questions about like, the adversary won't figure it out. They won't realize it's us. Folks, I can't stress this enough. Believe me, by the time you say that, you're already on a target list somewhere. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. Chris, what this brings me back to is, I want to say back in like 2016, 2017 era, there was a threat actor who we were tracking at the time, Fin6, I believe they were. They had sent out this extremely successful spear phishing campaign and had compromised and gotten footholds in dozens of organizations. I mean, dozens of cases, right? This one particular piece of malware they had out there was extremely effective. And we saw a lot of investigations where the adversary had a successful beaconing foothold and they never did anything with it. And we quickly remediated and shut it down. But it was environment after environment. And what we realized, or at least what some folks had posited at the time, was the phishing campaign was so successful, they couldn't handle all of the beacons that were reporting back. Now, whether or not that's the case, I don't know. We never talked to the
They
adversary.
DDoS themselves.
They kind of were so successful. It was like, I didn't expect us to be that successful, you know?
Was that the I Love You campaign by any chance?
It wasn't I Love You. It was a piece of malware, I think, called Junebug, if I'm not
Okay.
mistaken.
Yeah.
I think it was the Junebug malware. And again, it wasn't the
You're
virus
reaching
named
back. Yeah.
Junebug. Yeah, it wasn't the virus Junebug from back in the early 2000s. I believe it was a piece of malware that was named Junebug that was part of a Fin6 campaign, I think, but I'm really rattling the cage here
That's
on
going back. That's going back.
that's going back.
Yeah.
That being said, to me, this feels like a very similar situation where attackers are just like, there's so many vulnerable versions out there. We don't even know where to start yet. And I look at it as get yourself off that list as fast as you can. You know, the advisory's out there now. Like Chris, you and I have already talked about it. If we've talked about it, that means other folks have talked about it, and everyone should know. So if you're running SharePoint out there, take our advice and patch, or just take it offline for a minute. Let the business process suffer and then figure out a workaround. Don't give adversaries a chance because you're simply saying, we'll see if they find me or not. They've already found you. They just haven't gotten to you yet.
Yeah. So one specific confirmed incident involved Fermilab, the U.S. Department of Energy's National Particle Physics Laboratory. A spokesman said that attackers attempted to access the lab's SharePoint servers, but were detected quickly, and the breach was contained with no sensitive or classified data compromised. Little suspicious there. Bloomberg was the first to report on this attempted breach. The Department of Energy has characterized the overall impact of the SharePoint vulnerability on its systems as affecting a very small number of assets. The campaign underscores ongoing concerns about lagging patch management across both SLTT and federal infrastructure. Despite repeated warnings and patch availability from Microsoft, many organizations continue to operate vulnerable systems, leaving them open to exploitation. CIS has not attributed the attacks to any specific actor, but did indicate that the threat is being actively monitored. The case highlights the continued relevance of timely vulnerability management and centralized logging across federal IT environments. So sounds like nothing big's happened, but I always find it suspicious when, they say, oh, they got in, but nothing bad happened. And, again, we might be talking about this in a couple of weeks where it turns out somebody got the fusion reactor plans.
Yeah. Chris, we call that nothing bad has been disclosed yet.
Yes.
But we're talking about it. They broke in the front door. What did they take? Well, they broke in the front door, but what was taken?
Yeah.
This investigation is still pending, and at the advice of counsel, we are no longer able. Yeah, never mind.
Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see if we talk about this one again, which I am suspecting is likely.
We might.
Okay, so next up, traditional cyber attack methodologies, exploiting endpoints, moving laterally, escalating privileges are increasingly outdated as enterprise IT shifts towards SaaS and browser-based access. Today, attackers are no longer focusing on networks or endpoints in the conventional sense. Instead, they target identities accessed through browsers, since these are now the gateway to most critical business systems. With a shared responsibility model, SaaS vendors secure their infrastructure, but identity management, account configurations, credentials, and access control remain the customer's job. This has made identity the new attack vector of choice, exemplified by recent high-profile incidents like the 2024 Snowflake breach and 2025 Scattered Spider campaign. Attackers are targeting digital identities inside of browsers because that's where the authentication sessions and credentials live. Stolen credentials and session tokens are used in both targeted and opportunistic attacks. Info stealers, malicious browser extensions, and phishing campaigns remain central tools in harvesting these credentials. The Snowflake breach, for example, used info stealer logs from as far back as 2020, with compromised credentials that had not been rotated or protected by MFA. In most cases, attackers are not exploiting the browser itself, but using it as a staging ground, either through the session data it stores or by exploiting users directly within the browser environment. Yeah, this makes me think of Luke Jennings' talk, the new SaaS cyber kill chain from Push Security. They're smart guys, and I totally believe this is going to be the new battleground for organizations in the future.
Chris, I see this on a daily basis in what I do. It's identity is the new thing. I actually had a talk yesterday where I spoke about this to someone where identity is the new perimeter. Mm-hmm. And it's the thing that everyone's going after now. And it is the target, it's the focus, it's the goal, it's the crown jewels, it's the everything. And we're kind of having to revamp a lot of what we know about different adversarial techniques because of it. The idea of a lot of on-prem security approaches don't really work when you talk about identity that transcends hybrid environments like it's nothing. And that may sound like the most buzzwordy, salesy sentence that's ever come out of my mouth, but it's very true, because to the end user who's on a corporate issued device and is accessing things that are in the cloud, or sometimes accessing things that are hosted on-prem, when you get into enough shared credentials and stuff like that, they don't really notice the difference. To them, they just access stuff, not knowing all the authentication that's happening behind the scenes. Maybe they have to re-up their auth every now and then, but everyone's pretty used to that now. What I find even more interesting is how much time and work adversaries have put into understanding that and knowing exactly what to steal. For a long time, MFA was lauded as kind of this this will solve most of your problems. And then we readjusted our messaging to say, well, it will knock out the bottom tier of adversaries, right? And now we're at this point where adversaries can find ways to get around that.
Yeah.
It's still a great practice to have. I'm not saying don't do it, but understand it's not as impervious as everyone thought it was.
Yeah.
Right? Number one. Number two, this really signifies, I think, the shift in tactics for adversaries at the initial access point as well. We still have your brute forces and you still have your vulnerability exploitations like we just talked about with the last article and things like that. But you've got adversaries out there who are buying and taking, 2, 3, 4-year-old password dumps, combining data points together, attempting credential stuffing attacks and getting in, or finding that initial foothold and then using it to quickly escalate up and stuff, but recognizing that session that they're able to steal is the most important part of what they're able to steal, and then acting on that. And this is something for organizations to keep in mind. Like, identity security is going to be a pinnacle of the future if it's not for your organization already. And I think you quoted Luke and also to Adam over at Push Security as well, like guys who are really talking about the stuff that most organizations are really worried about these days. And I think it's important to recognize if you're not considering identity as part of a significant value target for adversaries out there, you need to revamp it really quick. Sometimes it's not always the blueprints in the secret folder.
Yeah, and that space is going to become exponentially more complicated as we see agentic agents working in place of humans, because those agents will be representing organizations and have credentials, and there will be a lot of them, and they'll be moving really fast, and trying to detect who's who and what's what. That's going to be a big challenge.
Chris, I was doing analysis just last night and this morning on trying to identify the core differences between repetitive user interactive login and agentic programmatic login. And obviously there's some key differences in the way that they look, but there's also some really little quirks inside of them that if you aren't paying attention, you might not recognize what's what. But to your point, a lot of times, kind of that programmatic approach has always been like, oh, that's clearly a script somewhere, or that's someone trying a thing. And we've been able to easily quickly rule in and out, good or bad, right?
Yeah.
Now it's going to get to the point where it's going to be very hard to discern for some folks out there. It's going to be very hard for some tools to discern as well.
Yeah. So one of the few technical attack surfaces in the browser itself is through malicious extensions, which can harvest sensitive data or hijack sessions. While the browser has a smaller attack surface in an OS like Windows, leaving extensions installation open to end users is comparable to making every user a local admin. Organizations using Chrome Enterprise or similar tooling can audit and lock down browser extensions as a defensive measure, reducing the risk substantially. But even then, phishing remains the most common and effective method for comprising identities. It continues to adapt, using obfuscation and anti-analysis techniques to bypass traditional email and network filters, and leveraging legitimate services and infrastructure for delivery and camouflage. New phishing techniques are increasingly MFA aware, bypassing strong authentication, using downgrade attacks, consent manipulation, or session hijacking. Attackers are also exploiting inconsistent identity configurations across SaaS applications. The SaaS ecosystem's product-led growth means identity management is fragmented across thousands of applications, some offering granular security controls, others offering none. This leaves security teams blind to gaps like unprotected ghost logins, weak passwords, or untracked MFA coverage. A typical 1,000 user org can have 15,000 plus identity instances, many of which are vulnerable. Given that most of these attacks originate and operate in the browser, it's also the most logical place to detect and stop them. Monitoring browser activity allows for real-time detection of suspicious behaviors such as phishing attempts, credential entry on fake pages, and unauthorized data exfiltration. Browser-based telemetry provides rich context, including user behavior, page origins, active scripts, and even hash password input. Instead of relying solely on upstream protections like MFA, enforcement, or identity dashboards, browser native detection offers a ground level view into the actual execution of identity attacks, allowing for direct intervention before compromise spreads. So yeah, great article. I suggest everybody go have a read of that one. And I will just also throw a shout out to John Tuckner's Secure Annex project, which is gives you the ability to monitor the browser extensions in there. He's also got a great newsletter that kind of keeps you up to date on what's happening in that world, but definitely something you want to keep your eye on.
Yeah, absolutely. And a huge shout out to John Tuckner as well. His newsletter is Just Browsing, and it's great. It's very informative. John, if you're listening, we love you, man. Hope all doing well, but please keep sending out that information. It's great to hear. And I think John is another person who's sitting kind of at that forefront of these browser-based attacks as well, Chris. And we're going to continue to see this area grow before we see it get more secure.
Mm-hmm. And hey, I'll just do the shameless plug here. LimaCharlie does have a Chrome and Windows Edge agent, and we also have John Tuckner's Secure Annex accessible through our one-click marketplace. So if you're looking to get some visibility into the browser, that's a great place to start.
If I can plug even further, I believe Secure Annex was debuted at Mission Control.
Yes.
If I'm not mistaken.
Last year, that's right.
Yeah, a very, very good friend to many.
Yeah, and it's great to see people take ideas and turn them into companies that make a difference in the world. Nothing makes me happier.
Absolutely.
All right, next up, the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, aka CISA, has added a new CVE, a high-severity cross-site request forgery vulnerability, or CSRF, in PaperCut NG/MF print management software. It's in the Known Exploited Vulnerabilities, or KEV catalog. The vulnerability, which carries a CVSS score of 8.4, enables potential remote code execution under certain conditions. According to CISA, attackers exploiting this flaw could alter security settings or execute arbitrary code by targeting an authenticated admin user. This would typically involve deceiving the user into clicking a crafted link during an active session. PaperCut is widely deployed in education, corporate, and government environments for managing print infrastructure. Since its admin interface often runs on internal web servers, a compromise could offer adversaries a convenient entry point into otherwise segmented networks. While there are no current details about how the vulnerability is being leveraged in real-world attacks, past activity suggests it's a valuable vector. Iranian APT groups and ransomware affiliates such as Bloody, Clop, and Lockbit have previously exploited PaperCut software for initial access operations. Yeah, when I first heard about this, I think somebody had said somebody noticed like over a gig of outbound traffic from their print server, and that's what got them to look under the hood.
Yeah. You know what's funny is these days when I hear a gig went out the door, I'm like, oh, that sounds like a pretty good website. Because it's just, it gets crazy these days. Like, I mean, if someone could be streaming a video, like I've done plenty of network analysis where someone is literally streaming like a live sports match, and you're like, this system is compromised. And you're like, oh, guy's just watching a sporting event, you know? But I can remember a day where you're like, yeah, that system leaked 5 gigs. You'd be like, in one night, you know, it was crazy.
Yeah.
Anyways, let me just kind of recap for anyone who might be hearing this for the very first time. The CISA KEV, or the Known Exploited Vulnerability List, is something that Chris and I have actually gone back and forth on a few times in agreement on from a topic perspective, because it is, for me, like the final bar for you should have patched this thing if you needed any justification for the business owners or for the operation. Here it is. And the Known Unexploited Vulnerability Catalog is a list of CVEs out there that CISA has recognized as this has now been actively exploited. We see people doing it out in the wild. And it is you need to pay attention if you haven't paid attention yet. And now we've got this PaperCut CVE on there. Again, CVSS score of 8.4. It does allow for remote code execution. Perhaps the biggest part here, which I believe Chris already mentioned, is that PaperCut is widely used in education, corporate, and government environments for managing print infrastructure, which is likely an area that is largely unmonitored or is unknown, or like okay, it's the print servers. Who cares, right? Lots of folks care, adversaries care, and they found this tiny little pocket they can sit inside and cause some damage with. We won't get into the attribution because I think even the CISA side of it is still a little like maybe not. They've made some ties, Chris, as you mentioned, towards ransomware groups before. They've also made it tied it back to Iranian state nexus actors. Regardless, there is no one out there who should be looking at this and saying, maybe we'll get around to it. Folks, if you are dealing with these particular pieces of software, as I mentioned, this is your final tripwire. We need to patch and upgrade this thing now, right now. Interestingly enough, at the time of this article, at the time of this publication, there was no known exploit in the wild. But if CISA is adding it to their Kev list, it is being exploited in the wild. So we're not yet at that precipice of someone posted a script on GitHub that shows you how to do it. It is only a select group of folks who know how to do it, but that clock is ticking. So the crosshairs of the cannon of the internet are moving slowly over you, and it may happen tonight, it may happen in a month, but it's moving in that direction.
Yeah, now's your moment. Go patch.
Go patch if you haven't yet.
Yeah. So as Matt said, no proof of concept exploit has been publicly released. Threat actors could execute attacks using phishing emails or malicious websites to trick a logged-in administrator into triggering unauthorized requests. This means mitigation requires more than just patching. In addition to applying the latest updates, organizations should audit CSRF token validation, limit administrative access to trusted IP ranges, and shorten session lifetimes to reduce the attack window. Federal civilian executive branch agencies are under a deadline to apply the patch by August 18, 2025, in accordance with Binding Operational Directive 22-01. Security teams should also align their detection and logging strategies with relevant MITRE attack techniques like T1190 and T1071 to improve visibility. Given the repeated use of PaperCut vulnerabilities as entry vectors for ransomware operations, organizations should treat this as a signal to evaluate the broader role of print infrastructure in their threat models and harden access accordingly. Yeah, and one thing I'll just drop here. Yes, I agree. The Kev catalog is absolutely like you should patch this 2 weeks ago if you're reading about it now. But also like it does have a focus on the needs of the federal agencies because when it gets in the Kev, they have mandated patching updates and stuff. So this printing thing sounds, pretty serious, but like it's probably limited to government and, federal infrastructure versus the corporate environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And Chris, that's the most important takeaway is the potentially impacted sectors and industries. Like that's always what we want to think of because that's usually a good bellwether for how much patching is actually being done. Mm-hmm. And I'll just be the first to say, like, this is a very generalized statement, but it ends up being kind of true. Like education, for example, a lot of educational IT departments are like bare bones staff or just kind of
stretched
up for the year, stretched a little thin. They're in its summer vacation for a lot of education departments. I know, like, I'm not saying they're sleeping at the wheel. That's not the case at all. But there's a lot of colleges in the United States, for example, right now, and this is something that's always kind of fascinated me. I taught a private class on a college campus once, and I knew the CTO who was there when I was there. And one of the things that he pointed out to me, which is very interesting, is he said, it was a massive state college over on the East Coast of the United States, and he said, every August, my user population count goes up by 40 to 50,000 in the span of a week, and he's like, the baseline of activity in my environment gets reset every August.
Yeah.
And he said, and then by the time I figured it out, it's winter break. 10, 15, 20% of those students leave.
Yeah.
And another 10, 15, 20% come in. And then it grows and it changes again. And he was like, so my summer is spent on getting ready for that huge uptick. And if you are a bare bones educational IT staff who is not well funded, patching might not be the top of your list right now, but for adversaries, it's finding those unpatched instances. And we're kind of at this, this competing priorities phase here now, Chris. So I'll just hopefully offer some repetitive advice for folks out there in these industries. Spend some time focusing on patching these types of tools, especially, I hate to say it, but it's a 2023 CVE, which means we've known about it for at least a year.
Yeah.
Right. And we should have some, patch. Just please patch. I don't want to. This is not the CVE I want to talk about in the future. I want to talk about SharePoint stuff, not this.
All right. Next up, Researchers at Nozomi Networks have disclosed over a dozen security flaws in Tritium's Niagara framework, a vendor-agnostic building management platform used in sectors ranging from industrial automation to energy and smart infrastructure. These vulnerabilities become fully exploitable if the system is misconfigured, specifically if encryption is disabled on a network interface. In such cases, an attacker on the same network, particularly from a man-in-the-middle position, can compromise the entire Niagara environment. The framework's two major components, station and platform, share key infrastructure, which significantly increases the potential blast radius in a successful attack. Among the disclosed vulnerabilities are 6 critical flaws, all with CVSS scores of 9.8, ouch, including issues like incorrect permission assignment, use of weak password hashing, and missing cryptographic steps. One notable pair of CVEs was used in a proof-of-concept exploit chain to achieve root-level remote code execution. The attack begins with the interception of an anti-CSRF refresh token over an unencrypted channel. Once this token is obtained, the attacker can carry out a CSRF attack against an admin, tricking them into generating HTTP logs that leak the JSession ID session token. So yeah, I mean, I hate to make a judgment from so far away, but this sounds like what I've seen in a ton of startups is like people build fast to get the product out and make it work from the user perspective, but leave a bunch of glaring security problems in the product.
Yeah, it's tough to tell if this is, and you and I have talked about this before, right? We've talked about pretty reputable multi-billion-dollar companies having really sloppy code out there. And then sometimes we have bugs that show up just because users don't know a different coding practice or the library or whatever becomes vulnerable and it doesn't get updated. And then other times, and from a software development perspective, we see instances where a third-party library that was imported or relied on is actually the source of the vulnerability. So sometimes it's tough to nail this down as to like, where did someone intentionally or unintentionally go wrong here, right? But in cases like this, I do think what you said about kind of rushing to market and rushing to a POV is unfortunately kind of a bigger security flaw for some organizations. I'm not sure the age of Nozomi Networks here, but I do kind of get this impression, this idea here that if you are the leader in OT cybersecurity and things like that. Sorry, this is not it's not Nozomi finding this. It's actually something in Tritium's Niagara framework. I'm giving Nozomi credit here of spending some time. Where I'm going with that is I don't know the age of Nozomi, but they spend so much time in that OT space that it's like a hyper focus on what they're looking at. And when you get to this Niagara framework from Tritium, it's kind of like this is not really a space where we want to have a lot of vulnerabilities living, number one. Number two, when I talked earlier about kind of those 3 categories of where software vulnerabilities may lie, when you're dealing in a space that is kind of like niche like this, Chris, you eliminate the ability of it really being like reliance of a third-party library. You're really leaning more on like vulnerable code being written and stuff like that. And hat tip to Nozomi for seeing and finding that. But this, I think, shifts the magnifying glass back onto folks who are building software for OT style networks and things like that. You've got to be careful because where your software gets applied can end up being some pretty far reaching, but also some pretty damaging areas if those CVEs are exploited. I think you've got some more insight into kind of what happens or what the adversary can do with those stolen JSession ID session tokens. But before I let you kind of walk through that part, I'll just remind folks here that, these CVSS scores are pretty high on these, number one. Number two, it's an exploit chain that gets put together to achieve root level remote code execution. Chris, these are just permissions that should not be obtainable. And I know that's idealistically speaking, but I just want to be clear that like this is starting to fall a little bit more on maybe some faulty code authoring, because to be able to basically escape or RCE as a root user, that means that session or that root thing, that permission, that capability is being borrowed from something somewhere else, and not always the best one to have. And sometimes it's as simple as, the server runs as root. And in other cases, it's like, no, we can find ways to trip the wire to make root show up, but nonetheless, not a good place to be in.
Yeah. So once the attacker gets a session token, they can access the Niagara station with elevated privileges and plant a persistent backdoor admin account. From there, they can download the TLS private key and impersonate the platform and station, enabling adversary in the middle operations. Using the CVE, this culminates in full system compromise with root level RCE. Tritium has addressed these issues in Niagara Framework versions 4.14, 4.15, and 4.10. However, the attack chain hinges on misconfigurations that violate Tritium's hardening guidelines, making proper deployment hygiene critical. In a broader context, Nozomi Networks has also reported vulnerabilities in the PNet-C library, a Profinet protocol implementation used for I/O devices. These include a bunch of CVEs, which enables a DOS condition by consuming all CPU cycles, a buffer overflow that can corrupt memory and crash the device, all of which have been patched in version 1.02 of the library. Similar issues have been found in other industrial and embedded systems, including Rockwell Power Monitor 1000, Bosch Rexroth Control X Core, and Inaba Denki Sangyo IB-MCT001. Who names this stuff? Camera line. These flaws range from command injection and unauthorized access to remote surveillance. CISA has warned that successful exploitation could allow attackers to modify settings, steal data, or gain persistent remote access. Collectively, these disclosures underscore an ongoing trend. Critical infrastructure systems remain vulnerable due to poor configuration, legacy security models, and complex dependency chains across operational technology environments. I think there's a neat thing to point out here that I think we see happening. Like in a proper OT environment, like a manufacturing plant, you still have this great segregation between like IT and OT. But I think as, we get more dependent on IoT devices and everything plugged into the internet in a place like a building or that kind of environment that is sort of this blend between, IT and OT, there's that segregation is not going to be there. And so you can have internet based attackers gain access to physical kinetic things that can cause problems in the real world. So
yeah,
I suspect we'll see a lot more of this kind of stuff in the near term.
It wouldn't surprise me. I'm in agreement with you there. I think this will be like kind of like an ongoing type of article that we will cover for many episodes. It's just going to be like these OT vulnerabilities popping up, and again, the level of exploitation. Who knows? Like, to be clear, we're talking about a CISA kind of notification here about critical flaws, not necessarily a weaponization. In fact, it's a little more hypothetical at this point. Nozomi was able to do it, and they should be doing it. However, we don't see adversaries doing this just yet. So I'm not going to say it doesn't get a big magnifying glass. A CVSS score of 9.8 collectively is just wild. But I will just kind of remind folks that, this is the time to patch, right? When it's been found from an institutional or a research perspective and it's not yet actively exploited, this is the time to patch and get stuff in place if you can. Chris, I think what I'm afraid of is a lot of these devices just get deployed and just kind of left out there. And that's where I think we'll see a lot of lack of support and just be like, it's a camera, who cares?
Yeah. No, I think that is actually super valid point. Like I have drawers full of devices that I'm sure haven't seen an update in 4 or 5 years, and maybe my kid plugs them back in at some point, and there we go.
And you never know, right? It's coming from the inside.
And I didn't even realize this was the last article, but speaking of an increase in IoT or OT environment problems, between April 2024 and April 2025, ransomware attacks on the oil and gas industry increased by an unprecedented 935%, according to new research from cybersecurity firm Zscaler.
Yikes.
While manufacturing, IT, and healthcare remain prime targets, the dramatic spike in oil and gas incidents is tied to the sector's accelerating digitization and increased reliance on automated industrial control systems. As these systems grow more network connected, they broaden the attack surface available to adversaries. Geographically, the United States was the hardest hit, absorbing half of all ransomware attacks disclosed on leak sites during the survey period. U.S. attack volume more than doubled to 3,671 incidents, outpacing the combined total of the next 14 most targeted countries. In parallel, data theft has become central to ransomware operations. Zscaler noted that the total amount of data stolen rose 92% year over year to 238 terabytes, as attackers increasingly prioritize exfiltration and extortion over traditional encryption-based tactics. This data-centric model amplifies pressure on victims by threatening public exposure. That's a wild uptick in
Nuts.
activity for
It's
anything.
nuts, isn't it? 92% year over year. Stolen data rising 92% to 238 terabytes. I mean, there's a hard drive manufacturer out there somewhere who's minting money, I guess. But ransomware in the oil and gas industry increased by an unprecedented 935%. Now, Chris, I want to be clear and fair about the numbers. We're not talking about a rise from like 90,000 to like 800,000. Right? It's probably in the low dozens to hundreds or something like that. But still an appreciable increase, number one. What I think is a little more concerning here is healthcare continuing to remain on this list as well. Obviously, ransomware targeting any industry is a pain in the rear and also something we don't want. But as we've talked about before, when we see like extremely vulnerable or typically hard hit industries getting hit hard, it's never a fun discussion. And it always kind of just zeroes it back in. Like, these are hospitals, these are, these are like educational institutions, these are libraries, these are schools and stuff like that. It always like kicks in that kind of morality clause internally. We were like, really? I mean, not that I want anybody to be cyber attacked, but like you're going after kids and stuff. It's just so odd. And the point being here, no industry is safe, unfortunately, and the attacks will continue to rise. Hat tip to the folks at Zscaler who reported on this. Chris, I know you've got some other increases to talk about in just a second, but if I'm in these industries, to me, this is a reminder, Chris, that like ransomware just continues to be at a top of mind threat. We can spend all day long talking about what state nexus actors are doing, the latest exploits and everything like that. But really at the core of the matter is like ransomware is still a big issue for a lot of organizations. It still drives a lot of spend and a lot of security implementations. It's something we can never forget about, probably for a very long time.
Yeah, and I'm with you on the hospital thing, man. I think those guys should be at the top of the hit list for law enforcement. Like as soon as you cross that line, like you go to the top of the list.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so Zscaler also reported a 70% increase in public extortion cases, along with a 93% surge in data stolen by the top 10 ransomware families, reaching nearly 250 terabytes. The most active groups during the reporting period were Ransom Hub with 833 victims, Akira with 520 victims, and Clop with 488 victims. Akira rose in prominence due to its affiliate-driven model and collaboration with initial access brokers. Clop's growth is attributed to its effective targeting of vulnerable third-party software and supply chain attacks. The ransomware ecosystem continues to fragment and evolve. Zscaler identified 34 new ransomware groups in the last year, bringing the total number of tracked groups to 425. These actors often exploit a relatively small set of high-impact vulnerabilities, with Zscaler highlighting exploits in SonicWall and here's our Fortinet VPNs, Veeam backups, VMware hypervisors, and simple help remote access tools. These systems are commonly internet-facing and easily discovered via routine scanning, making them attractive targets for initial access. This underscores the need for organizations to continuously monitor exposed assets, enforce patch management, and scrutinize access to remote tools, especially in industrial and critical infrastructure sectors. And you notice I paused on Fortinet there. I know we kind of beat up on those guys a lot, but I will say at RSA, I went and I got as many socks as I could from everybody giving away socks as their swag. And I got some from Fortinet. The worst socks I've ever put on in my whole life. I swear they changed color the first time I put them on because they were so thin and they got stretched. So Fortinet, I'm sorry, I'm going to keep beating up on you.
That's all right. Hey, Fortinet's been, we've had a few episodes out of you and we appreciate all that you've done to keep us talking about cybersecurity. We are 1 week away from Black Hat, so we'll see if Fortinet is going to be there. Speaking of which, Chris, I think I agree with you on like your final takeaway from the most recent article there, but I do want to offer like a quick segue into folks. I think Chris and I will both be at Black Hat. Chris, you gonna be at Black Hat?
I'm actually gonna be sitting this one out this year.
Oh, never mind.
We got some family camping stuff going. The LimaCharlie crew will be there in full force. We got a booth.
That's what
we're also going to be hosting some workshops at a private suite. So if you find us on LinkedIn or even on the website, LimaCharlie.io, you can get some information there. We'd love to have you come join us. There'll be food and drinks. And I think Ken Weston's going to be taking everybody through some really cool workshops on LimaCharlie. So it should be a ton of fun.
Awesome. Good stuff. Chris, I appreciate that. I wish I'd be seeing you in person, but that's okay. We'll meet up again soon, I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure. I'm sure we'll have the one to do it. So
awesome. All right, sir.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Take care. And that brings us to the end of another Intel Chat. You can support this show by sharing your favorite episodes with a friend or subscribing and giving us a rating or leaving a comment on your chosen podcast platform. If you want to be part of the conversation and access the intel we talk about in real time, you can join our community forum at community.limacharlie.io. Thanks for listening in, and we'll see you on the next one.